F1.
Red flag. Red flags to slow down.
What? The checkered flag is waiting.
I can see our Chequered Flag podcast being quite spicy.
5 Live's Chequered Flag podcast.
Hello and welcome to a hot, humid and fairly sweaty Singapore. Although I have to say, I, Rosanna Tennant, am sitting in the McLaren Hospitality being cooled down by the air conditioning, and I'm joined by the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson and the editor-in-chief at Autosport, Rebecca Clancy. Guys, great to have you with me here in the paddock. It is hot, it is humid, as I say. Are we dealing with the temperature well? Andrew, do you like this particular climate?
I love this race. I mean, I got a bit sweaty this morning on the way in because I got lost. They changed some of the barriers on the way in, or at least that's my excuse. But you put up with it because it's got such a great atmosphere here, the night race and everything, the lights around the track. The city itself has a really nice vibe to it. It's one of the best events of the season.
Also, Andrew doesn't have the same issue that Rosanna and I are currently dealing with, which is our hair, which is an absolute mess. And Lando Norris is currently sat behind us, and I've just heard him saying he's given up on his hair as well. So, yes, it's a tricky one on that front, but I agree. The atmosphere, it's a brilliant race. It's nighttime now as we sit here recording. You don't see a lot of sunshine, do you? You get about 3 hours because we stay on European time, which is odd, and you do feel very strange come Sunday night. But I agree, it's always a great race. The weather forecast for this weekend is changeable, let's say. Could well be rain on Sunday, so fingers crossed.
So you mentioned the European time. Both of you staying on European time then, Andrew?
Mostly, yeah. I mean, there's not really any other way to do it because, you get to the end of the day at the track, and especially once the track action started, you're not leaving till 1 or 2 in the morning. So and then you haven't had dinner, so you've got to go and have dinner then, and so that almost automatically takes you to 4 or 5 in the morning, and then you're going to bed. So you're mostly on European time, and I think you do suffer for the lack of daylight, but there's not really any other way to do it.
You called me a hybrid yesterday because I'm trying to do a bit of both.
Your strategy,
my strategy, my race weekend strategy. But you know what? I got it completely wrong. And you were with Beck at the time, Andrew, and you said, Beck says this is a terrible idea, you going to bed at about 12:30. Well, it was a terrible idea. I finally got to sleep at 4:15. No, that's not going to stand me in good stead for the race weekend. So an absolute foolish manoeuvre and strategy from me right from the off. So hopefully I'll hang on all the way through this race weekend. We've had to hang on a little bit this evening because we were going to record the podcast a little bit earlier on, but you were both in the Mercedes press conference earlier on. Lewis Hamilton was talking, and what he had to say sent a little bit of a ripple through the press room. Can you elaborate on what he was saying and what he was sort of talking about?
Right, so Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the FIA president, has given an interview to motorsport.com and autosport.com saying that he wants to limit a limit of the broadcast of swearing over the team radio. Now, it's ironic because the swearing isn't actually broadcast, it's always bleeped out, but he used the phrase, "we're not rappers." And Hamilton was asked about that. And he gave quite a nuanced answer. He said he understood some of what Ben Sulayem was saying. There are children listening and so on. But I'm going to quote him now. "I don't like how he's expressed it. Saying rappers is very stereotypical. If you think about it, most rappers are black. So it's really pointing towards we are not like them," in quotes. So I think those are the wrong choice of words. There is a racial element there.
You've been busy writing. A lot of the journalists went straight back to their computers to write their stories. This is important words coming from Lewis Hamilton, isn't it? And what does it mean then, do you think, for the future of the president of the FIA, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, and the FIA itself?
I mean, not the first time that Lewis Hamilton and Ben Sulayem have clashed, let's say. When the interview came through, obviously as my role as editor-in-chief for Autosport, we talked a lot about it and the connotations of using the word rappers and what that meant, and it was we just ran the story straight, but the quotes do all the work, to be honest.
Because this was an interview that
it was
Mohammed
an exclusive interview that we had
Autosport.
done with the president, and then we put the question to Lewis Hamilton earlier, and he said what I think a lot of people were thinking. I suspect that this story is going to run throughout the weekend. It is all that people are talking about in the paddock. It was in a closed written media session. There were no cameras, and it was incredible the speed at which, when we walked out of that session, people in the paddock were already talking about it. And it was amazing how quickly it actually spread around the paddock, and it's now currently what most people are talking about within the paddock. So yeah, I think this is going to rumble on through the weekend.
Well, we will keep an eye on that over the course of this weekend, and perhaps even over the course of the remainder of the season. Of course, he was talking about swearing. I'm putting you both on a warning: no swearing during this podcast, because we
There
like
has
to
been
keep
a lot of swearing today.
There has, hasn't it? Just
It
on
is
the
incredible.
day, we had Max Verstappen dropping.
I almost felt
F-bomb.
Max was doing it deliberately because of these comments, because he swore 2 or 3 times in the press conference, and he reacted quite aggressively against the idea. He said, you just have to, don't broadcast it if you don't want to. And he says, look, let's be serious about this. Okay, maybe there are kids listening, but they're only going to go to the playground and use those words themselves anyway. And being a dad, having seen 2 children grow up through the ages, all the way up to the ages they are now, which is 21 and 14, I know exactly what Max means. Kids learn to swear very early on. So I think people can be a bit sensitive about that. Having said that, of course, on the BBC there are rules about broadcasting swearing, what is and isn't acceptable. But this is much more, what Ben Sulayem has said has turned it into a much bigger and more serious issue than a few debates about whether someone should broadcast or shouldn't broadcast bleeped out swear words. So Beck's absolutely right. This is not going to go away, and it's not the first time Ben Sulayem's been caught in a controversial topic. There's been a whole raft of them, a whole list of them since he became president in December 2021.
Right, well, let's move on to the weekend. And we have to reflect a little bit on last weekend, because it was only a few days ago that we were racing in Baku, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And of course, it was McLaren who took the win with Oscar Piastri, a superb drive by the Australian driver. And they now lead the constructors. They have 476 points to Red Bull's 456. That's a 20-point gap already. It was a great performance from them last weekend. But they've only had a few days to reset, and McLaren the ones to watch again, Beck, now that they're leading the Constructors' Championship.
I mean, they have all the momentum, it seems. It feels like we're saying it absolutely sitting in their hospitality. But yes, it does feel like all the momentum is with McLaren at the moment. It was obviously a bit of an off weekend. I'm going to say it quietly because he is still sat behind me. It was a bit of an off weekend for Lando Norris. He spoke about it earlier. As you say, it's been about 4 or 5 days since everyone was in Baku. We're now here in Singapore, so not a lot of time to understand. I wouldn't be too concerned if I was Norris. The not qualifying or not getting out of Q1 was a mistake. The yellow flag, the white flag debate. He slowed. Should he have slowed? Anyway, that's what happened. That's why he was out in Q1, and that obviously made his life very difficult for the race. But I think Ferrari could be very good here. They look like a very strong team. They're very quick on these sorts of circuits. We've seen where they've, in Monaco, the very tight, twisty street circuits where Charles Leclerc traditionally does very well. So I think Ferrari are very much in the hunt for this one this weekend as well.
It's actually going to be a really interesting fight between McLaren and Ferrari, I think. I think Beck's right. I think Ferrari are probably favourites for the weekend. Bumps on a street circuit with curbs, that's perfect for their car, as they showed in Monaco, with Charles Leclerc winning from pole position, as they showed in Baku last weekend, although it's not quite as bumpy there as it is here in Singapore. Don't forget that this race last year was the only race all year that Red Bull were beaten, and it was by a Ferrari that won that race with Carlos Sainz. But the McLaren is also quick on this sort of circuit. Actually, on the subject of Lando Norris, he was saying earlier in his written media session that he feels like he's driving really well, but like little things here and there are not going his way, and he's right. They've got the quickest car now, at least consistently, and have had for a while. They've only dominated a couple of weekends, but they're always up there. And things are going wrong for him. I don't think you can put the last weekend on him, but, and you can't really put Monza on him either. He got overtaken by his teammate on the first lap. That dropped him back to third behind Charles Leclerc. McLaren's race kind of went a bit unstuck from that point on. But then you keep going back to Spa. He made a mistake at the first corner, Norris. At Hungary, when he was on pole, he got beaten off the line by Piastri. He got beaten off the line by Verstappen in Spain. There have been a sequence of these things where he's not absolutely maximised his opportunities. Each one has been a tiny mistake, but they keep adding up. And if he's going to challenge Max Verstappen for the championship, 59 points behind, he's really got to have a big weekend in Singapore, I think, and really eat into that lead, because 6 points here, 3 points there as it was in Baku. He's got to do an average of more than 8 points a race. That's a big ask, and he's got to do a big hit on it this weekend, I think. He's got a chance to, because this is not a Red Bull circuit, or at least it's not expected to be. Wasn't last year, but he's really got to make it count.
And he's going to need his teammate. And McLaren have been speaking about this over the last couple of weeks. It's become a little bit clearer now, Oscar Piastri's role, because whilst he's still in contention mathematically for the Drivers' Championship, I think he's starting to understand his role for 2024 at least, Andrew.
Yes, so he said again today, Piastri reiterated that if he can help Norris, he will. His job is to go out and do the best he can, but if a circumstance arises in the race where he can help Norris's championship chances, he will do it. That was supposed to be the situation in Baku as well, but the unfortunate incident with the yellow flags for Norris in qualifying meant that it actually happened the other way around, ironically. Lando Norris held up Sergio Perez's Red Bull for a lap just before Piastri's pit stop, and that ensured Piastri got out on track in front of Perez instead of behind him. Was really crucial to the outcome of the race. Piastri still had to do a brilliant race afterwards, superb overtaking manoeuvre, and then incredibly mature, controlled drive to hold Charles Leclerc off right from there right to the end of the race. Norris needs that to be the other way around this weekend, ideally. It's also important to bear in mind that I'm seeing a lot of stuff on social media about Piastri's becoming the faster driver at McLaren or whatever. That's actually not true. Yeah. Norris is the faster driver at McLaren by a tiny bit. He's out-qualified in 13.3. Piastri hasn't out-qualified Norris since Monaco. But Norris does have to go that little extra step and stop these little errors creeping in.
And if we take a step back, obviously they've taken the lead of the championship when it comes to the constructors. How big is this for McLaren, but also for Formula One, Beck? Because we've been waiting for this sort of gauntlet to be thrown down by a team. It is McLaren. What does this mean for where the sport is, do you think?
I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? At the start of the season, we were looking at another season of Red Bull dominance. Actually, in Lando Norris's session earlier, he was saying, you guys keep talking about us like it's a foregone conclusion, but we're not as dominant over Red Bull as they were over us at the start of the season, trying to say that actually don't rule Red Bull out yet. They're still a great team, and we aren't so far ahead that we're going to suddenly start dominating. But I think when we talk about the Constructors' Championships, we have to look at Ferrari as well, because they are stalking right behind in third place.
425 points behind 456 of Red Bull.
Yeah, so very, very much a gap that can be closed over the next 6 races. Red Bull are in danger of slipping to third. Incredibly, they are in danger of slipping to third in the Constructors' Championship.
I giggle because it's just such an amazing phrase to come out of your mouth in 2024.
Absolutely. No one would have had money on that at the start of the year, and if you did, well done. But that's the direction that it feels like Red Bull are going in. This, Andrew's already mentioned it, this is going to probably, we suspect, be a bad weekend for them, so that gap is going to change again. But the sport is in a very healthy position when we're walking into every weekend and we're not quite sure who's going to win. That's how it should be.
There's 2 stories here, actually. One is the decline of Red Bull. Max Verstappen won 4 of the first 5 races and 7 of the first 10. And he hasn't won now for 7 races. And he's almost certainly not going to win again this weekend unless something really unexpected happens. Meanwhile, McLaren last won the Constructors' Championship in 1998. Now, technically, they won it in 2007, the Spygate year, before they were disqualified for a whole controversial thing, which if you Google put the word Spygate into a search engine...
You'll be busy for a while.
Yeah, there's a lot to read there.
That's a rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. But McLaren have been through the mill in the last 10 years. Think about where they've come from. It's an incredible turnaround for them, not just in the last 10 years, but in the last year and a half. Andrea Stella, the team principal, was pointing out that they started the 2023 season as pretty much the slowest team, and here they are leading the Constructors' Championship. It's absolutely remarkable, and a lot of it is down to that man, Andrea Stella. He's turned this team around just by moving a few people around in jobs and directing them in a certain way and empowering them, as he puts it. It's one of the most remarkable competitive turnarounds I think I've ever seen in Formula One. But the same also goes for Red Bull and how far they've fallen this year.
Oh, I thought you were going to give me even more exciting details about that.
Great statistics there.
Yeah, I was just lapping them up. It is a huge moment for Formula One. They might not be the favourites this weekend, McLaren. Perhaps Ferrari take that coming into Singapore and the Grand Prix this weekend. But I would say with their consistency, McLaren are definitely still ones to watch. Let's hear from Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, starting with Piastri. He was asked how he's going to approach the rest of the season, given the championships are within reach for McLaren now.
I think for me, maintaining the lead in the Constructors' Championship now is by far a bigger target. I'm not out of the running for the Drivers' Championship, but I think now on average I need to score like it's over 10 points more per weekend than Max, I think. So I can try and go out and win every race, but it's now at the point where I need other things to start happening to win that, and for that to happen for 7 races in a row is not very realistic. So of course I'll try and go into every weekend trying to get the best result I can, and if the picture starts to look a bit brighter, then that's a bonus. But I'm certainly under no illusion that I'm well and truly in the fight for the championship. It's more if some crazy stuff happens, then I'll be there to work my way into the fight.
Lando, in order to cause the gap in the championship, do you see there are only opportunities from now until the end, or are there challenges? You've spoken about how you weren't the fastest car in Azerbaijan. Is that a cause of concern at all?
No.
Not at all?
No, I mean, we know it. We're closely matched on pace with the other teams, but there's going to be some, like always, in like the last few years, and like probably forever in Formula One. Some tracks suit you a bit more, some tracks not so much. Yes, Oscar still won the race without the quickest car, so it's still possible. I still finished 4th, and we had a very good day, but we know it, and we know we still have to improve. We still have things to work on. There's certain areas where Ferrari are very quick. There's certain times and areas where Red Bull are quick, and the same with Mercedes. So everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. We still have weaknesses, and we just need to make them maybe not quite as tough to battle with sometimes. But we have a lot of competition and 4 very strong teams, so it's tough at the minute.
You've just heard from the McLaren drivers, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. Lando Norris chasing down Max Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship. And there's been chatter in the paddock, hasn't there, about the legality of the McLaren's rear wing. We got a lot of sort of shots of it in Azerbaijan because, of course, Charles Leclerc was chasing down Oscar Piastri. We could see the rear wing moving slightly. Andrew, in the few days that have followed the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, what's happened? Because some teams are perhaps not happy with the way that McLaren wing flexes, but what have the FIA said about it?
Well, Red Bull are certainly unhappy, and they've quietly behind the scenes been making that clear. And there's at least one other team is not happy about it as well. You can probably guess who they are, given the competition that's involved. So basically, the FIA have said that all the wings currently comply with the regulations. They are looking at the wings at the moment to see if any action needs to be taken in the future, but the expectation is that nothing's going to happen for this year, and the McLaren will be allowed to continue running this wing. It's quite a clever thing that they're doing. The sort of ends of the upper element of the wing sort of twist upwards at high speed on the straight, which opens the gap between the 2 elements of the wing a bit more than it would normally be, which in theory reduces the drag of the wing, which obviously increases the speed on the straight, and then obviously it stops flexing when you slow down for the corner, so you get the full downforce again. It's flexible bodywork, flexible wings. It's been a story in Formula 1 for as long as there have been wings, basically. There's a sort of catch-all rule about movable aerodynamic devices. They're not allowed. But the problem is that all bodywork flexes to one degree or another, and so the FIA has these load tests that they put the wings through. Basically, the way Formula 1 works is as long as you pass those load tests, the car is legal until the FIA change the rules, and then you have to change your wing. The irony of this situation is that the team that's been most famous for exploiting flexible bodywork over the last 15 years is Red Bull, and now they find themselves, on the other side of the coin, if you like. But that's just part of the sort of rich tapestry of ingredients of the sport.
We've touched on Red Bull's struggles, and in any ordinary year, I would say 2023, 2022, 2021, we would come into this weekend and think, this could be one that they could struggle at. But we come into this weekend knowing they're already struggling. So is this going to be a double whammy of a difficult weekend for Red Bull, do you think?
You suspect coming into it that it is going to be one to forget for them. Obviously, Perez had a good run last time out in Baku until that crash. But he does traditionally go well on street circuits and seems to do very well in Baku. I wouldn't be expecting the same from either of them, Verstappen or Perez, coming into this weekend. It's going to be damage limitations.
They didn't do well last year here. We had Max Verstappen qualifying 11th, Sergio Perez qualifying 13th. They managed to salvage a 5th place in the race for Verstappen and an 8th for Perez. The car doesn't like the bumps. Is it going to be even worse this year, do you think, for them, because the car is struggling so much more on other tracks as well?
Well, I think there's 2 ways of looking at that. One is the competition's closer to Red Bull overall, so it might be worse in comparison to their main competition, i.e. McLaren, Mercedes and Ferrari, or McLaren, Ferrari and Mercedes I should say at the moment. But the difference is that there's a bit of a gap between the top 4 teams and the rest of the field. There was last year too, but not quite to the same extent perhaps, so it might be that Red Bull fall into that gap, so they could ironically qualify, even though they're less competitive compared to their immediate rivals. They might end up qualifying less badly this year than last year. I don't know, I'm just guessing. But the bottom line is that the Red Bull run is sort of designed to run very stiff and at a low ride height. If you have to raise the ride height, it loses a greater proportion of its aerodynamic downforce than the other cars. Therefore, it loses a greater proportion of its overall performance. And that's the sort of vicious circle that they fall into at Singapore or Monaco. So I would expect them to, at the very least, be qualifying at the back of the top 4 teams. And we'll see what happens from there.
And if they're not under pressure and they fall into the sort of anonymous category on Sunday afternoon, they can maybe avoid those curbs. So actually they could just sort of find their way to the checkered flag without...
Well, no, the problem with being in the middle of the pack when the race starts is that you find yourself caught up in crashes and smashes all sorts.
After the race start.
I think that could be... that will certainly be a cause for concern for them. They need to get through that first lap. And they love a safety car here. It does often come out. So
absolutely.
Ideally you want to be at the front for obvious reasons, but also in a place like this where track position is actually incredibly important too, it's going to be a long Sunday afternoon for them.
The thing about the safety car is you're never quite sure how it's going to affect the race. It can turn things completely upside down, especially if it's raining as well. So you can't rule out Red Bull winning, but just on terms of pure competitiveness, the expectation, at least at the moment, is that they will be at the back of that leading group.
Verstappen is very down, I would say. In the press conference, we touched on the fact he was being a bit agitated, maybe using swear words to get at the president of the FIA, but also his whole demeanour just came across frustrated. He was a bit angsty, wasn't he? I just felt there was an edge to him today.
I think he's been like that for the last few races. I feel like last year and the start of the year, he was quite punchy. He would bat us away in the media quite a lot if we asked any difficult questions, that's not unusual for a driver. But now he seems... He answers us very well. He's always done that anyway. But he seems really frustrated, and it feels like almost like an internal battle. And he's obviously not very happy with the car. I mean, why would he be? He thought he was perhaps not cruising, that's my word, not his, to a 4th World Championship. It's now going probably down to the wire, it would look like. But it has felt like since, maybe even slightly before the summer break, but certainly since the summer break, that he has been on edge.
The fact that he says he's targeting Q3, but let's see where we end up this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's not overplay the situation that he's in. Norris is right when he said what Beck said earlier. They are less far behind McLaren than McLaren were behind them at the start of the season. And at the moment, the things that Norris needs to happen to win the championship are not happening, and he still has a massive uphill struggle. And of course, the longer it goes on, the harder it is for him to win, because of course you start getting to the point where you, instead of counting that Norris needs an average of 8.2 points a race or whatever, you start getting to the point where you're counting by what race can Verstappen win it, because his advantage is X. We're heading quite quickly to that point of the season. So Norris, that's why I said earlier that Norris really has to take a big hit into that lead now, otherwise, because Verstappen's still controlling things, 3 points, okay, Norris beat him from 9 places further back on the grid in Baku, but it was only a 3-point swing, and he needs it to be 10 points or 15 points at each race, really.
Yeah, he's not hemorrhaging points. It's not getting that bad. And also, we've got a few sprint races. We've got 3 coming up over the remainder of the season. That can help Lando, but equally there's more risk, isn't there?
It doesn't help with the maths. It's actually really annoying.
Because the point differences are not that big in sprint races. It's 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for the top 8 places, so it's not going to swing things that much.
No, and I agree with Andrew. I think he needs to be taking chunks out of him on Sundays. That's where the value is. I mean, 25 for a win, 18, then 15. That's where your big margins are. So I agree with Andrew on this one, actually. It feels a little bit like McLaren are still being too reactionary to Verstappen. Like, he is leading it, and they think, well, he'll have a bad one this weekend, so we'll do this. And actually, there's still that feeling that even though McLaren is saying the right things now, and Piastri is offering to help Norris win the championship, even though Piastri himself is still mathematically in it and was actually doing the maths earlier in our media session about how he could still win it. So he's still a competitor. I mean, he's a team player, but he's definitely still a competitor.
Realistically, Norris needs to start winning races, the next 2 or 3, with more cars than just one between him and Verstappen. He needs to be winning with Verstappen down in 5th or 6th, so both Ferraris and Piastri between Norris and Verstappen. If that doesn't happen here and in Austin in a month's time, I think Norris's chances are basically gone.
That's what I was going to say. And the chunks need to come now, because you don't want to be waiting until the end of the season. They need to be taking big chunks out now, and McLaren needs to be coming into this weekend, for example, with Red Bull already on the back foot, we think, and to be honest, they think too, saying, okay, we're going for it. This is how we're going to play it. This is what needs to happen. And our entire strategy is to win. Norris first, Piastri 1-2, and that's it. They shouldn't be looking, 3-4 garages up the paddock. They just need to be, that's what they need to be solely focused on, and it doesn't quite feel like they are yet.
And also bear in mind, it's only a couple of races since Norris said, I don't deserve to win the World Championship, I've not been driving well enough. And he's still been, these little things that he talks about, they are little, but these little things he talks about are still not going in his favour. So, a lot of people, I think, looking at this season from the outside would say that overall Verstappen has been a better driver over the whole breadth of this championship than Norris has.
Even with a car that's been not performing as he would like. Well, let's hear from Max Verstappen, as we've alluded to already. Frustrated in the media sessions today, but let's hear how he's feeling ahead of the Singapore Grand Prix.
I know that it's not going to be our easiest weekend, just straight up. But, of course, you analyze the race that you did last year, a few things that could have, been done better. That's what we'll try to do this weekend. But yeah, I don't expect it, of course, suddenly to be one of our strongest weekends. But I just hope that what we did in Baku already, it stabilized the car a bit more. That was positive, and hopefully we can just build on that and see around here. I mean, of course, around here normally it's a bit more bumpy than Baku, but. Hopefully the car can take it.
That was Max Verstappen, still leading the Drivers' Championship, but of course Lando Norris trying to chase him down. As we've come into this race weekend, there's been quite a lot of talk about the driver market and Daniel Ricciardo's future. Of course, driving for RB at the moment, and I say that quite pointedly because a lot of people thinking this may well be his last race weekend for the team and perhaps in Formula One, Andrew.
So before the restart of the season, if you like, I was told that the plan at Red Bull was to drop Ricciardo after this race and bring Liam Lawson in from Austin. It wasn't a definite plan at that point, and I haven't heard anything since. I don't personally know that that's definitely going to happen, but it is being talked about within the paddock, and Ricciardo was talking about it today, saying he is expecting a decision on his future from Red Bull after Singapore this weekend. He was talking about it in the context of next season, but he said, you can't rule anything out in this sport. People have been dropped in the middle of the season before. And then Verstappen was asked in the press conference about Ricciardo and, how he felt about it. And he used the phrase, even if it is his last race, which everybody's ears pricked up and thought, does Verstappen know something that we don't? So there are lots of signals pointing in that direction, but I at least don't know whether Red Bull have definitively made that decision yet. But I think even if Ricciardo gets a stay of execution to the end of the season, it looks pretty likely like he's going to be out of Formula One and Lawson take his seat for next year if it doesn't happen after this weekend already.
And there are other. Well, you probably want to pick up on the Daniel
I was just going to say,
decision.
Yuki Tsunoda was sat next to Max Verstappen when they were asked the question of does Daniel Ricciardo deserve to stay on for the rest of the season, and Max Verstappen, obviously both drivers in the same stable as Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda teammates at RB, and Tsunoda gave a pretty similar answer of it's been great working with him, he's such a good guy to learn from. It felt like everyone was just saying their kind of reading out Daniel Ricciardo's obit of his F1 career, and it does very much feel like. And Daniel Ricciardo didn't bat away the question at all either. He was almost accepting of it. So it does feel like it might be his last race. And obviously, Liam Lawson had a chance to go to... Well, Williams were in conversation about taking Liam Lawson from Red Bull, but Red Bull said, no, you can't have him. The understanding being that they might need him before the end of the season.
I liked how Tsunoda said he didn't know anything, and then at the end he managed to give a very nice little summary of Daniel Ricciardo's effect that he's had on him, the respect he has for him, and as you say, it was a little bit obit territory. There's also talk about the second Sauber seat, of course, which will become Audi. Who are we thinking? Because Valtteri Bottas was talking about it in the press conference.
James Vowles is now quite publicly saying that they are talking to Sauber about getting a drive for Colapinto next year. Franco Colapinto, he has obviously come in for Logan Sargent for the remainder of this season. He's scored points. He was very impressive last time out in Baku. And they are talking to Sauber, Audi, as it were, to get him a full-time drive Next year. Valtteri Bottas, the incumbent, who is looking likely to lose his seat, said in the press conference today that he probably knows more than we do, which I suspect yeah, he does. And he seemed, the way he was talking, it sounded as if a decision had been made.
He sounded quite chirpy, though.
He did, but
maybe that was nervousness.
I don't know. I sort of just think he's that kind of person. Even if he was leaving, he'll want to leave on a high. He'll accept that he's had a great run. He's won races. He's had a brilliant career. He's done a lot within F1 that he can be incredibly proud of. It does feel like we may get an announcement on that one soon as well.
Another driver that was being spoken about was Gabriel Bortoleto, of course, managed by Fernando Alonso. Is Fernando Alonso knocking on the door of Sauber/Audi, trying to get him in there? He's currently leading F2, so it would make sense. Promotion.
For sure. I mean, it was Bortoleto who's leading the Formula 2 Championship at the moment and did an outstanding win from the back of the grid in the feature race at Monza 2 or 3 weeks ago. He was the guy that people were talking about as competition for Bottas before Colapinto got the Williams drive and suddenly put his name in the frame as well. So it's very, very definitely could be him.
So lots still going on when it comes to the driver market. I feel like our transfer window is a very long one in Formula One this particular year, of course, with Lewis Hamilton kicking things off with his move to Ferrari, and that was before the season had even started. We spoke about Ferrari at the very beginning of the show as the favourites. I think there have been some under-the-radar performances. Of course, we've had some wins from both the drivers, Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. If we really look ahead to this weekend, then, they are the ones you're expecting to be right at the front this weekend.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they were both very optimistic in their media sessions earlier today. I think the track will suit them. We were talking earlier about the Red Bull. It can't ride the curbs. That's where it really struggles, and the bumps. And Ferrari just don't seem to have that problem. They seem to have a car which both drivers are actually very confident with now, which is always very good, despite obviously Carlos Sainz went into the wall in Baku, but that wasn't his fault. Racing incident, as they say. Yeah, Sergio Perez has a different idea. But it's hard to see past them. They do seem, the characteristics of their cars seem to match the characteristics of these types of tracks. And so, yeah, my money would be on Ferrari.
How about you, Andrew, then? Are you envisaging a red theme to the podium this weekend?
I would not be surprised at all. Charles Leclerc's great around street circuits, as he proved in Baku last weekend. He got a bit caught napping a little bit by Piastri, but I think that was more a brilliant move by Piastri than any mistake by Leclerc. Sainz was very quick here last year, won from pole. Leclerc helped him, by the way, to do that by backing the others up. Their car works better, it loses less downforce at a higher ride height, so that's why they're aerodynamically they're as strong as they are around this sort of street circuit. So yeah, I do see them as the favourites going into it, but I think I would expect a close fight between McLaren and Ferrari, because let's not forget that in Monaco, I know we're going back a long way now, but Piastri was on the front row alongside Leclerc, and that was a great lap because Leclerc was basically in total control that weekend and looked like he was going to blitz pole, but it was really close in the end. Leclerc delivered the pole and the win, so I think we shouldn't rule out McLaren also being competitive against Ferrari, even if Ferrari have a slight edge if you're going to lay any money down, which of course I wouldn't.
Of course, I wouldn't expect you to. But what I'm hearing there, really, in summary, is that we don't really know, which is, as you said back earlier on, a great place to find ourselves with the 2024 F1 season just giving and giving.
I want to hear this story that Beck was going to tell us about Carlos Sainz.
Oh, do you want to hear that? So yeah, we were in Sainz's media session earlier, and he was obviously asked if he's spoken to Perez since the crash. And he said, well, we had a very awkward 20 minutes in the medical centre together after the crash. It was at high speed, so they immediately get taken for their checks. He said he looked over and he was sat next to Perez, Checo as they call him, and they had their heart rate monitors on. They were having all their vital signs being checked, and they were just sat in silence looking at each other and just kept looking at each other, looking away, looking at each other, looking away. He said by the time the 20 minutes was finally up, there were a few expletives of, what did we do? Why did this happen? Look, Charles was on those tyres. We both could have been on the podium. It's so ridiculous. And it was just, he just conjured this amazing image of the two of them sat on these chairs with all these heart rate monitors and beeping machines and the tense air between them. And by the end of it, they were just so annoyed with each other and themselves, and then they gave up this podium. So yes, they're all friends again.
Oh, good. I'm glad. The what could have been, the shoulda, woulda, coulda from Baku for both Perez and Sainz. Well, hopefully they can both make up for it this weekend. Beck, Andrew, thank you so much for previewing the Singapore Grand Prix with me. Are you off to sample some of the local fare, maybe a hawker market or something, or is it too late for that?
Well, shall we discuss our dinner plans when we finish the podcast?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Good plan. Yes. And you're right. They're probably going to lock us out of the media centre.
Well, dinner which happens at about 3 a.m. when you're in Singapore.
Oh, we've got a few hours. I'll go and hit the gym or something really proactive. We've got lots of course, commentary and coverage of the race weekend for you across the BBC, and the race is on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra on Sunday. We'll have build-up for you from 12:45. My thanks to Beck and Andrew. I've been Rosanna Tennant, and this has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.